Okay, so we're in a unit called the Columbian Exchange. You should have your notes that go with this, and you can stop and start the video as much as you need to get your notes filled in. So make sure you get them all filled in because you'll need them to study by. The Columbian Exchange, this is North America, the continent of North America. This is the continent of South America. We have Europe here and Africa here, and those are super important to know. Canada's up here, the United States is here, Mexico was here, and all of those make up North America. And so this is the Atlantic Ocean, and we had, during the Columbian Exchange, we're talking about a period of time before Christopher Columbus came, before the Vikings came over, before the Spanish came over to North America. We're talking about prior to that time. The only people that were living in the North America were the natives that were living here, Native Americans, what we refer to as Indians, that were living here when Christopher Columbus said that he discovered North America, which has, of course, been some debate because these people were already living here. It wasn't lost. They were people already living here. They just not had advanced North America into the modern times that Europe was in for that time. So I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on that, but keep in mind this is the Atlantic Ocean. Right in here is where we're at, it's right around where North Carolina's at, and this is Florida here. And so the Europeans decided to go exploring. We've already looked at a few explorers. And so they leave out of Europe and they take with them different supplies on their ship. And some of the things they took with them were honeybees, sugarcane, bananas, grapes, citrus fruits, onions, olives, turnips, coffee beans, peaches, and pears, grains such as wheat, rice, barley, and oats. Those are things like you would make oatmeal out of, or bread is made out of it, cereal is made out of that. Of course, you have rice, livestock, or cattle, sheep, pigs, horses. And so they get on these ships and they are coming across the Atlantic Ocean to come and explore around North America and South America. And so when they get here, the people that they meet are the Native Americans, and many of them befriended the Native Americans initially. And they get here and they find out, hey, the Native Americans have got things we've never heard of. They have squash, pumpkins, turkeys, peanuts, potatoes, tomatoes, corn, vanilla, beans, cocoa, pineapples, tobacco, peppers, and sweet potatoes. And so what the Europeans do is they take some of the supplies off of their ship, and as a gesture of kindness, they would trade things to the Native Americans. They trade some of these things that they had out of Europe with some of the things that the Native Americans had. And the Native Americans loved the things that the Europeans had, and the Europeans loved many of these things that the Native Americans had. And so then the Europeans would put these things here back on their ship, and they would take them back home to Europe. And then they would begin to grow these things from seeds. Both sides were growing some of these things from seeds, and this begins to affect the overall culture of the people. Now, you'll notice over here that one of the things that Europe took with them to North America were diseases such as smallpox, influenza, typhus, measles, malaria, diphtheria, and the whooping cough. And so these were super bad when they got to the Native Americans, because the Native Americans had never been exposed to these diseases. The Europeans had sick people on board their ship that when they left Europe, they probably didn't know they were sick, but they had been exposed to these diseases. They're cramped on these ships for weeks at a time, and a lot of people get sick. And so when they arrive into North America, they've already had people that have died, and then other people that are on board the ship have been contaminated or exposed to these diseases. And so they're getting off these ships and they're shaking hands with the Native Americans. They're talking to them. And you know, when you're around people, you tend to cough and things. And so they are exposing these Native Americans to these deadly diseases. Now, it was possible for some people to survive influenza and the measles. Many Europeans would survive this stuff. The problem is the Europeans had been exposed to this stuff, and the Native Americans had never been exposed to this stuff. And so their immunity was really weak. They had no immunity. Your immune system is what helps you fight off these diseases. And so when you've been around somebody that has the flu, sometimes you catch it and sometimes you don't. And when you do catch it, if you have a strong immune system, you get over it eventually. You're sick for a while, you don't feel well, but you eventually get over it. If you have a very weak person, such as an elderly person or a little baby who gets exposed to some of these diseases, it's hard for them to overcome it because they just have such a weak immune system. Well, the Native Americans had never been exposed to it, so their immune system has not been built up. As weird as it is to hear it, it is sometimes better to be exposed to some of these diseases or sicknesses than to not be exposed at all, because if you're not exposed to like the cold germs and stuff, then your immune system is super weak. So the Columbian exchange again continued. Explorers created contact between Europe and the Americas, which was what we just looked at with people sailing across the ocean. Interaction with Native Americans led to big cultural changes, such as you've got the Native Americans and Europeans sharing ideas. They also are sharing different foods with each other. So now you have different recipes, different dishes that are coming about, things that we enjoy every day today that would not have happened if it had not been for the Columbian exchange, those Europeans going over, interacting with the Native Americans. Contact between the two groups led to the exchange of plants, animals, ideas, people, and diseases. And this is what we call the Columbian exchange. The exchange of goods, the Columbian exchange, the exchange of goods, plants and animals developed in different ways in the two hemispheres. So you had plants and animals developing in Europe differently than they developed in Native Americans. Europeans didn't have potatoes, they didn't have corn, they didn't have sweet potatoes, they didn't have turkeys. None of those things did they have. People in the Americas, they had no coffee, no oranges, no rice, no wheat, no sheep. Cattle, so there were no steaks, there was no wool from the sheep, there would have been no Starbucks in the Americas because there was no coffee over here. Think about oranges for orange juice. So these were the things that the Americans did not have. So sharing discoveries, the arrival of Europeans in Americas changed all of this, where each side didn't have all of these things. Previously unknown foods were taken back to Europe, which I just showed you on the slide before. They were swapping out different items and putting them on ships and taking them back. And familiar foods brought to Americas by the colonists, ones that we're familiar with today. The introduction of beasts of burden to the Americas was significant development from the Columbian exchange. The introduction of the horse provided people in the Americas with a new source of labor and transportation. If I had to pick one of the most important animals that was exchanged, it would be the horse, and it was exchanged from Europe to the Americas. Prior to the Columbian exchange, the Native Americans did not have the horse. And so this was super important for them because they could use it as a work animal, but they also learned to control it and use it and to domesticate it, which means they used it not necessarily as a pet, but they used it, they could get it to do what they wanted it to do. And so they used it for travel a lot. And so this was the first real mode of transportation that the Native Americans had other than canoes, something that they could travel long distances on and they could move super fast on them. It was the first time they were ever actually able to move super fast. I've got to stop the video a second and I'm going to put in a second link, so hold tight just a second.